Hello and welcome back to Touchdown Talks. Welcome to the third part of the fantasy football players ranking series that I've been doing. This episode, as you can see, is obviously going to be for quarterbacks. So without further ado, let's get right into it. At number one on this list for fantasy football in 2024, I have Josh Allen. Josh Allen's the consensus number one overall pick for quarterbacks, I should say. He should be the top quarterback off the board in almost every draft you're in. Every draft that I've done thus far this offseason, he's been the first to go for quarterbacks, and it's no surprise why. Over the past 3 seasons, Allen has averaged 24.7 points per game. He finished first for quarterbacks in 2023. He should be one of the best yet again, especially for fantasy. He is losing Stephon Diggs at wide receiver this year, but at times their relationship in the past has been a bit strained. So Stephon Diggs leaving may actually not be that bad of a thing for Josh Allen, at least as far as fantasy goes. The Bills did lose a lot of other starters as well on both sides of the ball, so that could impact the Bills as well as Josh Allen. But either way, I don't think it should impact him for fantasy too much. I think it's safe to say he will be a top 3 fantasy quarterback at least this year. Up next, at number 2, this should come as not much of a surprise. I have Patrick Mahomes coming off his worst season of his career, which is pretty crazy to say, being that he won the Super Bowl in that year, but last year was his worst season for fantasy specifically, and that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Most of last year, the Chiefs weren't that great on offense and had to take a different approach to get to the Super Bowl for most of the year, kind of leaning on their defense. Even with last year being the worst season for him statistically, he was still a top quarterback, and for fantasy, he finished in 8th last season. So being that was his worst ever, I think pretty safe to say you can draft Patrick Mahomes at 2 for quarterbacks here. Again, about 31 overall, as you can see on the screen, and you can feel pretty confident in knowing that he's certainly going to be a top 10. He's certainly going to be starting worthy quarterback for you. At number 3, I have Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is coming off a season where he finished second for quarterbacks, right behind Josh Allen last year. Currently, his projection on ESPN would have him finishing first this season, so we'll have to see about that. I don't know that I believe he'll end up being first, but he should be pretty good nonetheless. He has a really good running ability, which is great for fantasy quarterbacks. That's part of why he's been so good. Although one interesting thing to note and keep in mind here with Jalen Hurts is a lot of his fantasy value this past couple years has come from the popular Eagles tush push. Now, unfortunately for the Eagles and for Jalen Hurts, they no longer have Hall of Fame center Jason Kelce, being that Kelce retired this offseason. So there's questions as to whether or not the Eagles are going to be able to perform the tush push as consistently as they have in the past. If they aren't, that could end up impacting Hurts' value, especially in the run game, which could hurt his fantasy value. Last season, he tied with Josh Allen for the most rushing touchdowns for quarterbacks with 15. The next closest behind those two for quarterbacks last year was 7. So Jalen Hurts, a lot of rushing touchdowns, and a good chunk of those came from the tush push. So for fantasy, the tush push was very valuable for Jalen Hurts managers, and unfortunately, they lose Jason Kelce, so we'll just have to see if the Eagles are going to be able to continue to abuse that play as much as they have in the past. We've seen other teams try it, and at least so far, we haven't really seen any other franchise outside of the Eagles be able to quite master it. So, it does leave that question open and make that seem a little bit valid. What's the key to why the Eagles have been able to do it, but other teams haven't? And it's quite possible that Jason Kelce was a big part of why the Eagles were able to do it. So if you're drafting Jalen Hurts, either way, though, he should be a easy, confident pick for you that he's going to be starting worthy. Again, ESPN's projecting him to finish first among quarterbacks this year. But again, to me, I just question how effective the tush push is going to be for them this year, and also interested to see just how the Eagles do. The relationship between Jalen Hurts and Coach Sirianni for the Eagles has, been reported to be not too great. Supposedly they've worked on it, and hopefully things will work out fine for them in the Eagles this season. Now at number 4, I have Lamar Jackson. He's the reigning NFL MVP. Jackson threw for a career best in passing yards in 2023, finishing with 3,678 yards. Last year, he averaged 20.4 points per game for fantasy. He had some inconsistency in a few of the weeks for fantasy. Had a few weeks where he only scored about 11 points, and then a bunch of them where he scored 30 points. And as you'll hear me talk about more in this episode, I already mentioned it in some of the previous episodes, consistency matters a lot to me. So in a sense, that's not my favorite thing about Lamar Jackson, but he is one where even though in the past his numbers have been inconsistent, at least in 2023, they were consistently good enough most weeks that it's fine. It's just, maybe every third week he might have kind of a stinker game for you that's somewhat disappointing. But for the most part, he's, the best quarterback in the league that week. So certainly a great pick, and that's why Lamar Jackson finds himself at number 4 on this list. At number 5, I have the sophomore in the NFL, C.J. Stroud, reigning Offensive Rookie of the Year from 2023. He finished 9th among quarterbacks last year in just his rookie season, so coming into his sophomore year, he should be poised to have another great one. The Texans added Stephon Diggs. Now again, with Stephon Diggs, there was some drama with him in Buffalo, and really throughout his career, Diggs has been one of those wide receivers who at times can get frustrated when things aren't going his way, the way he wants. But the Texans should be a really good team. Diggs should be new, so at least for this year, I would assume he might be a little bit more patient, whether things go the way he likes or not. But for Stroud, having Stephon Diggs there is just a whole nother weapon that he can go to. The Texans have tons of weapons for Stroud to work with. They've added Mixon in the backfield, so Stroud should have plenty to work with and should have a chance to avoid that mythical sophomore slump that a lot of people like to worry about. And coming in at 49 overall in average draft position, that's a pretty good spot. You can get him around the late 4th round, 5th round, 6th round, somewhere around there. Now at number 6, I have Dak Prescott for the Dallas Cowboys. Prescott could be a really good bargain draft pick this season. He's being dropped on average to about 10th for quarterbacks in average draft position right now. That could be starting to rise, though, as we go through the next few days heading into the season, because part of the reason his draft position has dropped for most of August may have been to do with the CeeDee Lamb holdout and also the fact that Dak Prescott is looking for a new deal. Now, Dak hasn't been holding out, so he should be totally available. And up until recently, CeeDee Lamb had been holding out, so that could have been a concern for you. But Dallas Cowboys just re-signed CeeDee Lamb to a big extension, so that's out of the way. Now, the only concern for me for Dak Prescott in fantasy is that Prescott seems to do a lot better when he has a good run game behind him. I mean, of course, most quarterbacks do. And for the Cowboys, being that they just brought in Ezekiel Elliott, brought him back, he's an older running back. They don't really seem to have much else going on exciting for the backfield, so that could end up being a problem. They've also lost some other key pieces this offseason. Nothing too crazy, really, but they've lost some other stuff on the team, so it could be interesting, but I do think Dak Prescott getting drafted at about 10th for quarterbacks, that's a pretty good bargain pick. You could wait pretty late as far as drafting quarterbacks, let people pick quarterback early, and still get Prescott at a respectable spot, and quite possibly get one of the better quarterbacks in the league for fantasy. Now at number 7, I have Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow had a rather disappointing season, as we all know, last year. Had a calf injury early in the season that really hampered his ability for the weeks that he was playing and available. Started slow, just really never got up to a very high producing capacity for fantasy. And then when his numbers did finally start to go up towards the middle of the season, then he ended up going down with the injury in week 11 to his wrist. Went out for the season, so his 2023 season ended pretty early, pretty disappointingly. Expect this year to be a pretty good bounce back year for Joe Burrow. They should assumably have all their weapons back, even if after this year they may be moving on from T. Higgins. Some other things could happen after this year, but at least for this year, assuming he's able to stay healthy, Joe Burrow should be poised for a bounce back year. Now at number 8, I have another quarterback that should be poised for a bounce back year, that being Anthony Richardson. He also had his season cut short, much shorter than Joe Burrow did. Richardson only was able to play 2 full games. In each of those, he scored 20 points, and then the other game he scored 29 points. So that's pretty good. 49 points in two games. That's really high production for anybody in fantasy. So with that, obviously he showed flashes of greatness. Very much looks like a Lamar Jackson, Cam Newton type of quarterback. The biggest concern is just going to be, can he protect himself better and stay healthy so that he is available week to week for you in fantasy. But assuming he's able to be healthy, Anthony Richardson could be a really good pickup for you. Now at number 9, I have Jordan Love for the Green Bay Packers. In his first year starting in 2023, Love finished 5th for quarterbacks, so pretty good. In a year when Green Bay wasn't even really expected to do much, they were actually kind of expected to take a step backwards last year. I believe they're still the youngest average age for their roster in the NFL, if not close to the youngest team in the NFL. So being that they were even still last year able to outperform expectations, and certainly Jordan Love was, and really towards the end of the season came into his own. As you can see, for his point totals, 319 points, did pretty darn well for himself last season. I personally think the projected totals that are being shown for him this year at about 260, I honestly think those are kind of low. I think he should a pretty good chance to do just as well as he did last year, if not maybe even better. So I think Jordan Love's a really good pick here. Again, around 8th for quarterbacks, going around 70, early 70s, so that's a pretty good spot for him. I think he's a pretty good bargain pick. Could end up being one of the best quarterbacks in the league this year for fantasy. Certainly at least starter worthy for fantasy, I should say. Now at number 10, I have Kyler Murray. Due to a knee injury that he suffered in 2022, the end of the season, he missed a good chunk of 2023, wasn't able to come in and start until week 11, and when he did come back, he showed signs of his usual ability to run like he had in the past. He had one of his weaker performances passing for the year, and week to week, he scored about anywhere from 11s to 17s. With a few of the other weeks, he managed to get 20 points or so for fantasy, so not terrible. And again, not a complete season for him last year either. Cardinals also had some other key injuries and stuff that happened. So this could end up being a good year for Kyler Murray, but he's certainly more of a, borderline starting quarterback, maybe a backup for you. Now at number 11, I have Brock Purdy. Is he really that good? Is he being disrespected? Is he being carried by his teammates, his coach, Kyle Shanahan's offensive genius? Thankfully for fantasy, we don't really have to debate that too much. I know those are some of the common questions that always come up with Purdy. He's a huge talking point, one of the favored players to talk about in sports talk, but at least for fantasy, we don't necessarily have to worry about some of those questions as much, being that he's on the 49ers, plays with CMC, Kittle, Debo, Ayuk, you name it, they all play under Shanahan. Brock Purdy is always going to be poised for greatness, as are the 49ers as a whole. Now, to be fair, Brock Purdy last year did have some weeks, if you look at his week-to-week production, where he wasn't the most consistent. There were quite a few weeks where he was in the low double digits, even a couple weeks that he ended up in single digits, but he also had a good amount where he was above 20 points for the week. So to me, he's a borderline starter or a backup for you in fantasy this year. Now at number 12, I have Jaden Daniels with the Washington Commanders. Second overall in the draft this year, reigning Heisman Trophy winner. Why do I have him ahead of Caleb Williams, even though I'm a Bears fan? My main reason for having Jaden Daniels ahead of Caleb Williams in this list is that, at least for fantasy, Jaden Daniels, I think, has the advantage of the fact that he's more of a running style quarterback, and so that quite often translates into more fantasy production, especially earlier on in a quarterback's career, so I think he's got good potential. I would say that Jaden Daniels, getting drafted where he's at and with the potential I believe he has, he's a good, draft him as if he's going to be a good backup for you. If not, he's got good starter upside for fantasy this year. Now at number 13, I have Jared Goff with the Lions. I want to say that Goff is a sleeper pick. He did finish in 2023 7th for quarterbacks, so that's pretty high, and being where he's getting drafted right here, pretty low, so he could be a pretty good bargain pick for you. The one issue I do have with Goff was his week-to-week production in 2023. He had a lot of weeks where he was down in the single digits or the low teens, which isn't conducive to winning in fantasy, in my opinion. So unless all your other positions in the league are near the top throughout the season, Goff is likely not going to be able to get you the win. You're going to end up needing to be lucky to the point where most of your other starters are at the top of the league each week in order to guarantee you a win consistently. So Goff may be a good backup quarterback, one that you can stream in on the right weeks when you need him, but I wouldn't draft him with the expectation that he has to be my starter. Now at number 14, I have the Jaguars quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. It's kind of hard to nail down what type of fantasy quarterback Lawrence is for me. He's entering his 4th season. Lawrence finished 17th in per game fantasy production in 2023, although last year, just like in 2022, it was his second straight year where he finished strong towards the end and got better. After week 11, he was 6th among quarterbacks in week-to-week production, so that's a massive improvement towards the end of the season. Jacksonville has lost their top wide receiver from last year in Calvin Ridley, so that could end up impacting Lawrence in a negative way, and that's part of why Trevor Lawrence finds himself here at number 14 on my list. Average draft position for quarterback 16. He's more of a backup quarterback with quarterback 1 starter upside for you. Now at number 15, I have Caleb Williams for the Bears. Williams will, of course, have a strong supporting cast this year. He's coming into the league with DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, as his pass catchers, not to mention Cole Kmet at tight end. So those should be all some really good passing targets. He'll also have DJ Swift, Khalil Herbert in the backfield. So he'll have tons of weapons around him. The Bears have improved their offensive line. They really do have a good amount of pieces on the team, both on offense and defense, to really, if they can put it all together, the Bears have a chance to surprise people this season, and I think many are aware of that. And so with that, I do believe that Caleb Williams has upside for fantasy, but being that he is a rookie, it's tough to know, being that he's a rookie quarterback going to the Chicago Bears, who haven't had a quarterback throw for more than 4,000 yards in a season. That's tough history to beat. If there's anyone that can do it, it does certainly seem to be Caleb Williams, but for fantasy, as far as drafting, that's obviously not going to help his stock, so that's why he's getting drafted around 14, 15, 16 for quarterbacks, and, in the early hundreds as far as overall pick in fantasy drafts. So draft Caleb Williams as a backup quarterback with the upside hope that maybe he ends up being a really good starter for you. Then at number 16, I have Tua Tagovailoa for the Dolphins. Tua does have tons of weapons that can help him produce on the right week, although many of his offensive teammates like Hill and Waddle do score a lot of points. Tua is not really as reliable as them, so certainly if you're looking to draft Dolphins players, specifically if you're a Dolphins fan, Tua would probably be lower on my list compared to maybe some of the wide receiver talent that they have. Obviously Tyreek Hill going in the first round in fantasy drafts, but Tua specifically, he's really at best a quarterback 2 or backup for me. Next at number 17, I have Justin Herbert with the Chargers. He's got a new coach, obviously, with Jim Harbaugh. In 2023, he finished off the season pretty strong for the first 4 weeks, but then after that, kind of went off the rails, didn't do well, then missed the end of the season due to injury, and then recently in July, he was diagnosed with a foot injury and has been in a walking boot. We haven't really seen him in preseason because of that, but the Chargers do expect him to be available for Week 1. Chargers could be in a bit of a rebuild, but at the same time, things kind of went pretty sideways for him last year anyways, so I honestly expect him to have a better season than he did last year, but still hard to really be too confident in that for fantasy, especially being that Jim Harbaugh, a lot of the moves that the Chargers have made this offseason make it very obvious that they're going with the route that Jim Harbaugh usually does, which is to have a very run-heavy team. So, in a way, that could end up helping Herbert and the Chargers, obviously, could end up helping them, but selfishly for Herbert, for fantasy, might not help him as much as you would want if you really wanted to start him in fantasy consistently. But he could be a backup for you with starter potential. Now, before I get into number 18 and number 19, I just want to preface, kind of funny, the next two quarterbacks have a lot of similarities here. Both are veteran quarterbacks. Both of their 2023 seasons were derailed by Achilles injuries very early into the season. Both used to play in the NFC North, but no longer do. And both are past their primes. So starting off that list, I have at number 18, Kirk Cousins. Cousins has a chance to have a bounce back year. He'll no longer have the luxury of having Justin Jefferson to throw to, but the Falcons have brought in a lot of weapons this year. Maybe this will be finally the year that tight end Kyle Pitts shows the potential that fantasy owners always seem to hope that he'll have going into a season and usually get disappointed. Maybe now with Kirk Cousins there, maybe Kyle Pitts will be able to live up to that. They brought in Mooney from the Bears. They've got some other weapons, and with Kirk Cousins there and the other moves they made, they certainly have potential to be much better than they have been. And Kirk Cousins, especially being that he missed a good chunk of the year, should have a bounce back season. But unfortunately for fantasy, kind of hard to be confident enough really to draft him too high outside of drafting him to be your backup. Now, at number 19, the other quarterback who went down more famously due to the Achilles injury last year, that is, of course, Aaron Rodgers. This is the first time we've had this in this series, in that 2023 points total. He's not a rookie, so he doesn't get an NA. It's a 0. That is the first time I've had to have that in this series there, but obviously finished the season last year with 0 fantasy points, only played 4 offensive snaps, and wasn't able to get any fantasy points out of those. But so with that, obviously he's no spring chicken anymore. It's been over 500 days since the last time we saw Rodgers finish a full game, start and finish a full game. So that's one of the concerns for me, obviously, with him and the Jets. A lot of things for the Jets and for Rodgers in fantasy may come down to their offensive line, how well that offensive line can protect him. It's safe to say that Rodgers may not be near as mobile as he used to be. I mean, certainly not necessarily a running quarterback, but that was always Rodgers' style is being able to move, often get out of the pocket and make things happen. Be a really good field general, the way he has command the field, and that's been a big part of Rodgers' game. But after this Achilles injury, at the age that he's at now, there's a lot of question marks, and we'll just have to see starting on the first Monday Night Football game against 49ers on the road. We'll have to see how he does. But for fantasy, though, you could still draft him. He is still here in this range at 18. He could be a backup quarterback for you if you choose to not go back for your backup quarterback. I mean, of course, not to say that you even have to draft a backup quarterback. Not everybody does, but I typically do try to draft a backup quarterback. And so if you're going to do that and you're going to save that till later in the draft, till pretty much the end, Aaron Rodgers could be a good pick for you with really good upside if things do work out for him and the Jets. Then finally, to round out the top 20, I have Matthew Stafford with the Rams. He had a much better season last year than some might have expected, as did the Rams as a whole. He didn't really have the greatest season, though, for fantasy, but it was a bounce-back year of sorts from what he did in 2022. In 2023, he averaged about 16 points per game. However, between weeks 12 through 16, he scored 20-plus points each of those weeks, which is pretty good. And, of course, here at 20th for quarterback, he is pretty much at the end of the list of quarterbacks that's likely going to be getting drafted. Could possibly even go undrafted in your league. I am going to include a few honorable mentions. Many of these quarterbacks likely will go undrafted in your league, but whether you choose to maybe pick them up because you think they have upside, or just keep an eye on them as we get into the early parts of the season, these may be some quarterbacks you may want to pick up. If your team is unlucky and your quarterback goes down with an early injury, these might be some guys you can pick up. So first, number 21 being Baker Mayfield. Then next we have Deshaun Watson, followed by Geno Smith with the Seahawks. And then finally, rounding out these honorable mentions, we have another rookie in Bo Nix, who did get named the starter under Sean Payton. Sean Payton picked him. There seems to be a good bit of hype and belief around the league that of the rookie class, Bo Nix could be that quarterback that ends up being the surprise out of the class and ends up being the Sean Payton's next Drew Brees, possibly. We'll have to see. But Bo Nix does round out my honorable mentions for this list. And with that, thank you for watching. Up next very soon, I'm going to have my top 15 list for fantasy tight ends. That'll be coming very soon in the next couple days. Thank you for watching, and you have a great day.